One Battle After Another is an action comedy that follows Leonardo DiCaprio's Pat, aka Bob Ferguson. He's a munitions expert and member of the far-left revolutionary group known as the French 75, partaking in dangerous operations where they aid immigrants but also commit acts of political terrorism. 16 years after stepping away from the chaotic front lines of the group's operations, Bob and his teenage daughter Willa live a peaceful life, though still heavily influenced by Bob's former life with the Resistance. And that takes on a whole new meaning when the group's former antagonist, Colonel Steve Lockjaw, played by Sean Penn, comes back into the picture hunting Bob and Willa down. So this is a monster of a chase movie. There's a lot going on with things like politics, action, comedy, family stuff. Starting deep at the center of all that and going outward from there, it's a story about consequences. We follow several characters who indulge in thrills, overlooking the ways they could come back and haunt them. For Bob, his involvement with the Resistance is the large skeleton in his closet, especially now having a daughter to consider. For his partner Perfidia, played by Tiana Taylor, it's about the things that call for precedence in her life over the revolution. And for Steve Lockjaw, it's about his old desires that got the better of him and their lasting impact that would eventually bar him from the status he seeks. All of these character arcs involve passionately diving headfirst into their impulses and then later having to scramble to figure out how to atone for them or undo them. This all plays into the movie's subtle statement about the very serious territory of revolution. We follow a bunch of characters who relish in the thrills and the spectacle of revolting, some of whom don't fully comprehend how dangerous those waters are. No matter the cause that you're fighting for, and no matter the side of the political spectrum you're standing with, taking arms against the system is not just a cute little social media trend that you get to exploit for your own social gratification. People can sometimes get caught up in the thrill of revolting rather than its impact, but it's not something to take lightly, and it's not really supposed to be fun. It's usually very dangerous and can result in massive repercussions. This movie's biggest statement is that when the going gets tough, you keep on battling one after another, because there's always a fight to be had that requires the strong-willed to see it through. This movie is very politically charged. It is especially wild when you consider that the movie wrapped filming last year, and since then, it has become so much more relevant. So I recently reviewed the movie Eddington, and I started with this whole 3-minute-long rant about trying to maintain a neutral perspective when watching political movies. I'm not gonna do that rant again here, but the TLDR is that I am a human being. Though I have biases that will likely influence my perception, I have no intention of using movie reviews as an outlet to boast my own political views. I'm just here to give the movie as fair of a review as possible. So anyway, by following the French 75, which are basically a fictional version of Antifa, and pitting them up against an antagonist who works in immigration control and is a blatant white supremacist, the movie takes a pretty firm political position. That is not to say that everything the protagonists do is ethical though. Plenty of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies follow murky characters who we aren't always supposed to support. There Will Be Blood is a great example, but plenty of PTA's movies work the same way. We're not always supposed to condone what the protagonist does on screen. Though this movie takes a hard left approach by highlighting the toxicity and elitism of white supremacy and following characters who oppose it, it definitely does not always frame Bob, Perfidia, or the activities of the French 75 as noble. They are also guilty of committing blatant acts of terror and relishing in them. Some things will be pretty black and white for most viewers, others will not. If the protagonists do things that you agree with, great. You can consider them heroes in those moments. When they do things that you don't agree with, just remember, it's a movie. Sometimes we follow characters we don't support, and we can do that without getting pissed off. The movie doesn't feel like it's on a high horse though. It doesn't really ever feel like it's being preachy, with the exception of a little bit of commentary on what we teach in schools, or to be more specific, what we don't teach in schools, which is slightly more loaded than the former. At face value, it's not really saying much about the nuance or complexities of immigration control or over-militarization, as much as it's just painting a negative picture of those things and their severity. That might be a shortcoming to some viewers and a relief for others. It is specifically more of a race story than it is about immigration. White supremacy is what's at the core of the story's conflict. How exactly? Unfortunately, I don't think I can really dig into that without revealing major spoilers, so sorry. But one of the things that keeps the story grounded and makes the political stuff more palatable is the fact that it's also very much a story about family. It's about how we prioritize the people we love and the lengths we go to protect them. Bob's focus shifts to his daughter once she enters the picture, and despite his competence coming up short, he never stops trying to protect her. Their relationship is very interesting, and it perfectly speaks to what this movie does very well, which is walking the line between silly and serious. Bob is a loving father, but he's also very authoritative. His ties to the French 75 have a lasting impact on how they live their day-to-day lives, and that's Willa's biggest struggle. Among many aspects of this film, their relationship is framed as tense, but also kind of funny. On the more serious side, there's a lot of pretty intense subject matter. There's the aforementioned stuff with immigration control, occasional blood and gore, and some pretty sweet car chase scenes that will likely make your palms sweat. The car chase fun all comes in the last act, and it's honestly pretty tense. Like, it's actually anxiety-inducing watching cars pass each other when time is of the essence. That's coupled with the fact that nothing and no one is sacred. This is a movie where you're really not sure if the MCs are gonna get the happy ending that they're looking for. And right from the beginning, we jump into the action and the tension begins. For the most part, it's pretty exciting from start to finish, with the exception of a few little lulls in the second half. But the movie is also very funny, courtesy of some quirky characters. If you're familiar with PTA's work, you might see these slightly strange characters as a subtle form of his signature world building. Starting with Bob Ferguson, who is just utterly hilarious. Once the time jump happens, every moment that he's on screen is just pure gold. Where before he was this very intense and focused activist throwing himself into chaos, now he is stoned and clumsy. A lot of the humor plays off of him being a washed up revolutionary. He often struggles to do the things that were once second nature to him, and how frustrated he gets by this yields some pretty hilarious results. My only complaint really is his lack of agency in the story. He's a character where the plot mostly just happens to him, and he doesn't really affect much around him. The one thing that keeps him great at his core, though, is his love for his daughter. You're very much rooting for him throughout the chase, even if their relationship wasn't amazing. It's hard not to talk about a DiCaprio performance without talking about awards potential. He has a pretty impressive track record with nominations. This is definitely a great lead performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. That said, that's exactly how I felt about his performance in Killers of the Flower Moon, and he did not get nominated. Perhaps the Academy is just over him, or perhaps this just has to do with the competition being stiff. There are a lot of strong lead actors with movies coming out this season, so it's hard to say at this point in September whether or not his chances are strong, but nevertheless, it is a fantastic performance. While we're talking about awards contention, Sean Penn is certainly getting nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He is seriously at the top of his game here. He's angry, he's bizarre, he's silly. He is so many things here. Where the MC Bob is very loosened up and uncoordinated, Steve Lockjaw is very tight, meticulous, and robotic. In this movie, he's trying to secure a seat in the ranks of an interesting organization, we'll call it, and that's the thing that contextualizes his villainy through and through. He's also got a little bit of a sexual charge to him that makes him that much more strange and disturbing. So I saw online somebody yesterday had compared his performance to Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Basterds. And normally when I hear things like that, I think, oh, okay, I mean, maybe cool it, I saw that yesterday and I thought, oh, well, honestly, you might be right. He might actually take home the Oscar. As for the rest of the cast, Perfidia was very much a thrill seeker. She doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, but when she does, she's pretty fun and chaotic. There's a fun comedic layer to the fact that she and Bob don't seem to have much chemistry beyond their revolutionary pursuits. Willa, much like her dad, doesn't have much agency in the story, but it quickly becomes much more about her than it is Bob. Chase Infinity also gives a great performance here. It's surprising that this is her big screen debut. She's clearly got great acting chops, and I will definitely be keeping my eyes peeled for her work in future projects. Benicio del Toro's Sensei was a small role, but he was quite enjoyable. His gravitas paired with Bob's chaotic nature made for a fun character dynamic, and he's even a little bit silly himself. There are a few other characters worth mentioning as well, but I personally just don't have a whole lot to say about them. Though it's his biggest budget yet, and certainly one of his more straightforward stories, this is still very much a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. It has all of his signature directorial touches. The score was really unsettling. There's a large chunk of the movie that has very chaotic piano music playing off key, and there's even a guitar riff at one point where the guitar was very clearly out of tune. It sounded like organized chaos, and that kind of speaks to Bob as a character. He himself is very out of tune after years of being away from the revolution. And the cinematography is just beautiful. It's shot in VistaVision, the same film format as The Brutalist that's starting to make a comeback, giving for crisp visuals, and in typical PTA fashion, the movie has lots of long takes and Steadicam work. A lot of sequences will show every little detail during a passage of time rather than shortcutting things. This makes the movie feel really immersive and tense, though it sometimes bogs it down a little bit. I like to call them the PTA lulls, just too many back-to-back scenes where you see every little detail and little development, and it can prove kind of tiresome. So digging into criticisms, I would have loved to have seen more revolting beyond the first act. There's still a solid amount of bedlam beyond that, but the movie ends up being a lot less about the revolution that was. There are also plot details that don't really ever amount to much. Dare I say, a Chekhovsky that doesn't really get fired. And then there's one major plot detail toward the end that does not have the big impact that you would expect. It definitely recontextualizes the last scene though, and really affects how we view it. That was definitely purposeful. Think like in his last film, Licorice Pizza, the viewing angle influenced by him being 15 years old. It really warps how we look at those characters. So honestly, the few shortcomings feel very small when you think about the big picture. The movie is a slam dunk, and it is absolutely one that will get PTA back into the Academy Awards. Through sheer filmmaking style, well-handled tone blending, great performances, and a dynamite script, this movie feels like it's just in a whole different league when you compare it to a lot of the other things that are playing right now. So overall, this movie was great, certainly incredible, but also certainly divisive. This will piss off some viewers, it will please other viewers, and then everyone in between will see. This is definitely a slam dunk for fans of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, and if the idea of a politically charged action thriller with good comedy sounds great to you, look no further, see it in theaters, and then see it again. They were giving these out at the screening, of course, right when I decide to try growing a goatee. Thanks for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I will see you later this week with my review of Him.